Good morning and welcome to Live from Currituck Extension. My name is Cameron Lowe, your County Extension Director. And on today's episode of Live from Currituck Extension, we're going to look at how to have difficult discussions and conflict in a positive and productive way. Before we begin, I would invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click that bell up there to receive notifications anytime we go live or anytime we post new content. If you have questions during today's class or comments, or you just want to interact, I'd invite you to use the comment box. Good morning, Harold. I'd invite you to use the comment box there with the Facebook video as he just did, or I would invite you to pose your questions or comments there in the chat box on YouTube Live. So that's all the logistics there. Oh, if you're watching the recording of this class, you can certainly email us or interact with us on social media. Our contact information is in the video description, so please reach out to us if you will. Just so you get an idea of what Cooperative Extension is, real quick, North Carolina Cooperative Extension is an outreach arm or a field office, essentially, of NC State and NC A&T University. And we exist to match the research conducted at those universities with the specific needs related to our communities through educational programming and various technologies. And our goal really is to empower you, our citizens, to improve the quality of your lives based on that research and that education and that information. And we primarily focus on the areas of agriculture, foods and nutrition, and 4-H and youth development. And then I'm also given the responsibility for community and rural development, which is kind of the lens that I bring you this information through today. So today's information is really based heavily on the research that was conducted at North Carolina State University, as well as some conducted at Oklahoma State University Extension. So conflict, difficult discussions. There is no shortage of it out there right now. In fact, one quick glance at social media will give you a plethora of examples of what not to do and how not to handle conflict. In fact, it's pretty exhausting to me, really. But dealing constructively with disagreements, dealing constructively with conflict can have some really profoundly positive results. I mean, if you think about it, we open ourselves up to making real contact with others if we do conflict and we do difficult discussions right. We open ourselves up to completing unfinished business. We expand our vision, really, of what's possible at home or at work or in our communities. Managing challenging experiences, managing conflict can be a real growth experience if we do it right. So today, we're going to try to learn a little bit about conflict. We are going to look inward at how we handle things as individuals, and I'm going to share with you a practical tool that will help you navigate challenging discussions. It's a tool that I've been using for years and years, and it's fantastic. First things first, let's break conflict down. So there are 5 common sources of conflict. The first is data conflicts. This deals with lack of information. It's conflict centered around lack of information or misinformation. Then there are relationships conflicts, and most of us are familiar with those. Conflicts that are centered around emotions or stereotypes, miscommunication, those kinds of things. Then there are structure conflicts, and these most often center around power struggles or environmental factors like space or time that really hinder our ability to effectively resolve conflict. Then there are value conflicts, which center around our differing ideologies and expectations or standards. And then finally, there are interest-based conflicts. And those are conflicts that center around our personal interest or perhaps our competition for resources. So it's important to understand, too, that many of these conflict sources might overlap and different things might be going on at the same time. Multiple of these conflicts could be happening at the same time. An interesting note is that conflicts involving values and structure tend to be the most difficult to resolve, although not impossible. Now, it is important to remember that, or to realize that every family sorry about that. I'm going to learn how to use my technology here in just a minute. It's important to understand that many of our families, our communities, our organizations, our workplaces, our friend groups, we all have at least one challenging individual in those situations. And if you can't identify who the challenging individual is, it might be you. We all view the actions of others really kind of based on our own value system and our own life experiences. And what that means is that different people are going to react differently when placed in exactly the same situations. And so recognizing that fact and recognizing your tolerance of that fact can be very, very important. Again, so we all respond to conflict in different ways. And sometimes that's really because of our own innate preferences. Sometimes that's because of the conflict itself. So we're going to look at the 5 modes of conflict identified by the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. And so it identifies 5 different ways we tend to respond to conflict. And I'm going to share with you, now this slide is going to be useless to you because it's very small links. So if you look in the description associated with this video, these links are there for you. One is a link to an online assessment that helps you, that will auto-calculate and give you your results in terms of how you deal with conflict. The other is a link to a paper-based, so to speak, or a hand-tabulated conflict mode instrument. Which is one you can see here. And you can just go through, chart your answers to these 15 questions, tabulate your score, and then the results. It will give you some brief descriptions of the conflict management styles and which ones you most likely associate with. So those are 2 links that are available to you to determine really your default style of handling conflict, because we all probably have a default style of handling conflict. So let's look at the 5 conflict handling modes. So according to the Thomas Kilmann Instrument, the 5 modes of handling conflict are competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding, and accommodating. And there are appropriate times for using each of these modes, and there are some cautionary pieces to overusing any of these modes. So let's take a look at that information just a little bit more deeply. So the first style of handling conflict is called the competing mode of handling conflict. And the mantra there is really, it's my way or the highway. Now, like I said, this can be very useful sometimes. So it is very useful style of handling conflict when quick actions are required. So if you need a decision, you need it now, somebody's got to make it. The competing style is appropriate here. A decision just has to be made. It's very appropriate or useful when basic rights are at stake. It can be very useful when people are being too considerate. Nobody wants to bite the bullet, so to speak, and make a decision. A competing style can be appropriate in that situation, or when consensus fails. Everybody's pouring into making the decision, but you can't come to some type of an agreement. We've got to do something. The competing style can be very useful for that. You do have to be very cautious with this style, though. Some of the limitations of overusing the competing style of conflict resolution is that there's low empowerment. So if you're always making the decision, you're never empowering those around you to make decisions. You may begin to get lower feedback from other people involved in situations. They know you're going to make the decision anyway, so why give you that feedback? Overuse of this style of resolving conflict may actually tend to escalate conflicts, because losers in these situations may begin to want to retaliate. It's frustrating to never win in a conflict situation. So that's the competing style. The next style is a collaborating mode of resolving conflict, and that mantra there is really 2 heads are better than 1. And this style is really useful if you're trying to gain commitment from multiple parties. If you're trying to work through some issues, some hard feelings, coming together, collaborating, coming to a collaborative understanding can be very useful. If you're trying to learn or deepen your or your group's understanding of an issue, with collaborating, that's an excellent time to use this style of conflict resolution. Or if you're trying to merge differing perspectives, again, collaborating can be very effective. As with competing, there are some cautions to overuse, though. And those tend to be, well, first off, collaborating is very time and energy intensive. If you've ever tried to collaborate with a group of people to get something done or to overcome an issue, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy. Collaborating is wonderful because everybody shares the load, but it can also result in diffused responsibility. There's no single individual that the buck stops with, so to speak. And overuse of this style, people might take advantage of that fact. So be cautious with collaborating, just like anything else. The next style or the next mode is compromising, and that mantra is really, I'll meet you halfway. So I'm going to win a little bit, you're going to win a little bit, I'm going to lose a little bit, you're going to lose a little bit, and we're going to meet in the middle. So compromising can be useful if you have or need a quick solution. When you're in those situations where you need to avoid a power struggle, all right, we're not going to fight, I can give up a little bit. When goals or values are only somewhat important, and compromising is an effective way to achieve a temporary solution. Overuse of compromising can lead to losing sight of overarching values. It can promote cynicism and lead to distrust. So if you think about it, if in your family situation, you're constantly compromising a family value to overcome a conflict that you're having with a party, that can lead to family member distrust. So be cautious with compromising as well. The next style is avoiding. Believe it or not, that is a real and it is an appropriate style of dealing with some types of conflict. And that's the we'll deal with it later mantra. Now, it's important to remember that you are in this situation, you're avoiding conflict, you're not avoiding people. So conflict avoidance is very useful when the issue just isn't that important. Think about your kids arguing at the dinner table about who last did the dishes. You know what? Let's just not deal with that. Let's avoid it because it's just not that important. It's very useful when you need some time for cooler heads to prevail, a timeout, so to speak. It's very useful when confrontation would be damaging to the relationship. And honestly, conflict avoidance is useful when there's somebody else or some other party that could resolve the issue more effectively than you can. So those are just a few useful times when it's good to avoid conflict. Be cautious though, because there are lots of limitations here as well. So constantly avoiding conflict or overusing that can lead to decisions by default. So just because you're putting off a decision doesn't mean that a decision isn't getting made. It just means that it's happening by default and it lacks your input. So that's definitely another limitation. It can also lead to an overcautious environment. And what I mean by that is if you're constantly tiptoeing around difficult conflicts and discussions, the people around you are going to begin to do that too because they don't think it's safe to wade into that territory. And then issues can fester if you're constantly overusing the avoidance of conflict. Again, there are appropriate times to avoid, but we don't want issues to fester either. All right, the final mode of conflict resolution is accommodating. And the mantra here is, it would be my pleasure. And so accommodating style or the accommodating mode of conflict resolution is useful when the issue is more important to somebody else than it is to you. So you know what, I can concede this one because obviously this is more important to you. When the relationship itself is more important than the issue. So this relationship is more important than me winning the argument. I can accommodate. Or when there's just no way out, you're losing, you're not going to win this conflict, you're not going to get your way. It's okay to concede and accommodate. So that's useful style in those instances. Beware of overuse though, because in terms of the accommodating style, if you use it too much and you're constantly giving over to everyone else, it could result in a loss of respect or influence. It could result in your ideas being overlooked constantly. And again, just like with the conflict avoidance mode, it can lead to some of those festering issues. All right, so those are the 5 modes of handling conflict. Again, the links to the assessment are in the video description if you want to go take those, see what your default is, and then be conscious of that and be aware of how you default to handling conflict and be aware of when it's appropriate to use that style and when it isn't. Try to stretch yourself a little bit. So how do we do it? How do we navigate difficult conversations? How do we navigate difficult people? It's not fun, but again, it can be productive and it can lead to a lot of growth if we do it right. So a few general strategies or a few general tips for dealing with difficult people. First off, put problem people in the proper perspective. Say that 5 times fast. People are people. Put it in the proper perspective. Number 2, take your pick. Are you going to be positive or are you going to be negative? I advocate for positive as much as possible, but certainly there are probably appropriate times to be negative as well, but know that going in. Also, don't expect difficult people to change. We're pretty set in our ways as individuals. We are who we are. Don't expect people to change. You can't control somebody else, but you can control yourself. Learn to respond as well as listen. We preach listening all the time, but you have to respond too. So train yourself on those things. Deal directly and discreetly with people. Now, here is a big one, all right? Because when you deal with a conflict in the public space, in front of a lot of people, you're now dealing with the conflict and you're also dealing with personal pride. People don't want to lose publicly. If you can deal directly with an individual or directly with a group of individuals, privately or discreetly, you're much more likely to come to an agreeable resolution of that conflict. When you put it in the public space, just like on social media, my goodness, when we throw those things out there into the public space, it just gets ugly and hateful and a point of pride. And nobody's going to deal effectively with conflict in that public space. Be straightforward when you're having conflict and difficult discussions, and do the best that you can to keep your emotions in check. And then also be gracious. This is a time for you to learn some things. So be gracious in that. When you're communicating one-on-one, just a couple of tips here when you're dealing with conflict. Number 1, spend some time on rapport. So if you're dealing with a conflict person, say at work, it's helpful to spend a little time working on your relationship as well. When we know people on a more intimate level, we are more likely to be productive in our relationships and in our conflict. The second tip here is to minimize interruptions. The best place for me to have a conflict with my child is not in the middle of the kitchen while we're cooking supper. The best place to have a difficult discussion or a conflict with a child or my husband is to remove ourselves from that place of activity and distraction and get someplace private, in an office or the bedroom or someplace else where we can minimize interruptions and focus on the issue at hand. Another tip is to watch out for psychological barriers. So if you have conflicts at work and you constantly are calling people into your office where you sit behind the desk, whether we know it or not, that creates a mental barrier, a psychological barrier. It gives us the feeling subconsciously of, I'm being called to the principal's office and I'm in trouble. So be aware of those types of things. Be aware of your posture. This speaks more open and communicative than this. Your body language is a lot of what you say. Use intensity to your advantage. Now, what I do not mean is yell and scream. What I do mean is when you're trying to communicate a very important point, regulate your tone, bring it down a notch, use that level of intensity to your advantage. You'd be surprised how far it gets you. And then sometimes it's very beneficial to go to the other person's turf. If I need to have a difficult conversation with my child, the best place to do that might be going to their bedroom. They're safe there. They feel comfortable there. Perhaps that's the best way to do that. Again, listening is hugely important, just as important as talking. And a couple of tips here are to pay respectful attention. Let the speaker know how you're interpreting that message through your silence. Not distracted silence, but interested silence, through your body language, and then through your verbal responses, lastly, your verbal responses. All right, now here's the practical tool that you can all use. So I'm letting you behind the curtain just a little bit. This is how I prepare for difficult conversations. In the workplace, I actually write these things out, my responses to these things out. I script my difficult conversations in the workplace, typically. At home, if I'm having a difficult conversation with a family member, I don't script it out, but I certainly think through these bullet points. And this information came from someone by the name of Susan Scott. I think her company is called the Fierce Company. And she called this the beach ball preparation form. I can't exactly remember why, but I have found this incredibly useful over the last number of years. And it's real simple. It's you take the time to, pardon me, I'm sorry about that. You take the time to define the issue, the core issue. So write it out. What really is the issue here? And it might not be what the conflict is about. It might not be what you're arguing over, but define the issue. Let the person you're having a conflict know why it's significant. How is it affecting you? How's it affecting our relationship? How's it affecting our family? How's it affecting our workplace? Then you communicate what the ideal outcome is. If I had to make a decision today, here's what it would be. So an example, if I had to make a decision on what to do about your behavior today, I'm taking your door off the hinges. Or if I had to make a decision about what you've done to the workplace today, I'm reassigning your work location. And share some relevant background information. Now, I'm not talking about hashing up old conflicts. I'm talking about relevant background information. This issue's been going on for a while, and here is the impact that it's had on our family or our workplace. Share what you've done up to this point. So sometimes I'll say, up to this point, I've just kind of ignored this and hoped it would go away. Or up to this point, I've moved your seat in the classroom to hope that this would be resolved. Again, the options you're considering, including the one that you would choose if you had to make a decision today, and then invite that other person in the conflict and the difficult discussion to help you. This is the help I need from you. Help me brainstorm solutions. Help me brainstorm consequences. Help me out of this situation. Let's work on this together. Let's be collaborative and let's get this done. Again, I've been using this form for years. I find it highly, highly, highly effective. I write my answers down if I'm going into a difficult discussion in the workplace a lot of times. At home, I at least kind of think through the answers. So I hope you find that helpful as well. Again, it's from Susan Scott. I think her company is called Fierce Incorporated, but it's been an excellent resource for me. So finally, just to really wrap things up for today, you can control yourself. You can manage a situation, but you cannot control another person. So learning more about your conflict style, learning more about others' conflict style, and giving yourself some helpful tools can really help you to work hard and to deal with conflict and difficult discussions in a much more productive manner and grow as a result of those conflicts and difficult discussions. So I hope you've gotten some meaningful help from today's discussion. If you've got further comments or questions, the chat box is there for that input, or you can reach out to me by email or on social media, and those links are in the video description. Also in the video description is a link to a very brief 5-question evaluation. I'd really appreciate it if you'd fill that out. It'll help us immensely in developing content and how we get that content to you. Tomorrow's class, do not miss it. It's going to be a great one led by Adam Fermella. You're welcome, Darlene. It's going to be a great one led by Adam Fermella, our agriculture agent, and he'll be bringing you the facts on 2020's latest horror, murder hornets. So he's going to let you know the real deal on murder hornets tomorrow at 11:30. Don't miss it. Thanks for joining and have a great day, everyone.